welcome back to my channel. I am Imani the writer, and today I have so many cool things to tell you. So first and foremost, I will be uploading a review, my very first review, and it's coming up and I'm so excited about it. But before I do that, I do want to explain to you guys how I plan on doing my review. So let's talk about my reviews. I have a very particular system that I've not really seen before, and I find it super important for me. You know, I feel like it's a really cool system to make sure you guys get the best information possible on, like, to cover all of your bases, to cover all aspects of a story. I try to be as inclusive to narrative structure as I possibly could, and also promote the fact that, you know, we're all here to grow. You know what I'm saying? I didn't want to make like a pros and cons list, because that's not what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to highlight the things you're awesome at, but also just, you know, give a little input about what I might have done differently. So let me tell you a little bit about my system. I have the glow or grow system, right? So what that means is when I do a review, everybody gets 100 points across the board, A pluses for everyone. But there are two different kinds of points that you can obtain. These are glow points and these are grow points. Glow points are things I want to highlight that were really good, things that I'm super impressed with, things that I really like. I'm gonna highlight those as glow points, and grow points are just places where I recognize the potential, I recognize what you're trying to do, I recognize, you know, the thought and the work you put into it, but if it were up to me, I might have done something just a tad differently. Of course, these are my opinion, but I do pride myself on being constructive. So I am gonna tell you guys the truth, or at least my truth, on what I see, and it's not gonna be rooted in, oh, whether or not I like the piece, or whether or not I like you, or whether or not I like da 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 da. It's gonna be based on what I feel is a strength in terms of narrative structure, and what I think is not necessarily a good look, or not necessarily gonna give off the best effect to the reader. So those are glow points and those are grow points, and I have 10 different questions. Basically they're criteria, but I put them in the term of questions so I can answer them and put them on a scale of 1 to 10. They're all worth 10 points, and you'll either get, and it's both like 10 grow points or glow points. So for example, I am going to list out all the questions for you guys, and you'll get 10 points for every single question, but you might either get glow points or grow points. For example, the first question is, do I care about these characters? Now, I know that sounds like not an objective question. I'm not asking, do I, Imani, care about these characters? I'm asking, do I, as the reader, care about these characters? And the reason why that's important is because you have to create a character that has some sort of stake within the story. Their personality is something that the reader can be attracted to. We have to care that these characters exist. We have to care what happens to them. We have to care about their story. If it's somebody that the reader does not really care for or really care much about, then, you know, that's, your characters drive the story. And if we don't care about those things, you know, we're not really gonna care about the story. So that's my first question. My second question is, do these characters develop in a believable way at a seemingly natural pace? Now that's a little bit harder to explain, but they're always, even if you write like fantasy or sci-fi, there always has to be some realism rooted in the way these characters develop. You have to set the stage for who these people are and have them develop in a natural kind of way. I'll talk more about that and give more examples with the videos that I make, with the reviews that I make, but that's just what I mean by that. My third question is, are all characters necessary, and do they fulfill their role to drive the plot? there are a lot of instances where I feel like certain characters are there just as filler. Like, there are your main characters and there are your secondary characters, and all those characters have roles to play, they drive the plot somehow, but then they have filler characters. They give them a whole personality, a whole name, everything a character could possibly need, but the character does nothing. It literally doesn't do anything for the plot. It's just there to filibuster, and that's not a good look. You know, you have to make sure you know what you want your plot to be, you know what you want your theme to be, you know what you want your story to be about, you know what it wants to encompass, and you figure out the best characters to fulfill that role. My fourth question is the writing style understandable and creative? Like, can I read your submission? And are there, you know, really creative lines that I like and respect, and you know, it's not monotone, I can hear you through your writing, because everybody writes differently. Everyone has a different writing style, and you can tell different things about people depending on the way they write. So, is it understandable and is it creative? Like, you know what I mean. Are all scenes necessary and fulfill their role to drive the plot? So just like how characters can sometimes be unnecessary, there are certain scenes within books or movies or TV shows that are just not necessary. They do not drive the plot in any sort of way. They don't tell you anything new about your characters. They're just there for no reason. My biggest pet peeve when I'm trying to watch a show is unnecessary sex scenes. Like, they're the most annoying. I can't stand them. They're the annoying thing in the world. The most annoying thing in the world. And the reason why is, like, there are sex scenes that, you know, they do something for the narrative. You know, they're there for a reason. Like, they either represent something, or they say something new about the characters, or they develop in a different way through the sex scene, or the place they're having sex in is symbolic of something. You know, it does something. You know what I mean? But nowadays, it just be random, like, for no reason. It doesn't do anything for the plot. It doesn't do anything for the story. It's just there because sex sells, I guess. That's not a good look, all right? It's just not. You always have to make sure every single scene is important and it does its job to drive the plot. Are all pieces of dialogue emotionally true to the characters? What I mean by that is, like, if you have a character, they have a character type, they have a personality, they have a way of moving throughout the world. So you can't make a character and make them say something that's just out of character. You know what I mean? So it's just things like that. That's what I mean by emotionally true. Because of course this is fiction. Of course nothing is true. But emotionally true just means that it stays true to the character. It is believable. Even though it's fiction, I can still see something like this happening. And it's true, even in fantasy and sci-fi, there has to be a level of realism. There has to be something familiar about it that can make the reader really connect and feel like it's something familiar, you know? My next question is there a balance between exposition and action? Now, when I talk about this, I'm really discussing the beginnings more than anything else, because beginnings are often the hardest part of anything, let alone narrative, let alone stories. The beginnings are always the hardest part, and the reason why is because it's important to grip your reader, get their attention, and the way to go about that is with action. But since it's the beginning of the story, it's super important to have some exposition. You have to set up the world and make sure we understand what we're getting into. It's especially important in fantasy and sci-fi. You have to have some exposition. You have to, because we have no idea what we're getting ourselves into. So there has to be a proper balance between exposition and action. Enough action to keep us interested, but enough exposition so we don't feel lost and confused. My next question is the beginning strong and compelling? This kind of relates to my last question a little bit more, but I'm really just focusing on the beginning. I will literally take the first page, the first paragraph, and the first sentence, and I'll pick it apart to tell you whether or not it is strong and compelling, because your beginnings have to be strong. They have to be strong, because that's what's going to make people want to continue reading. And if it's not strong, that's the biggest thing you have to focus on. I'm going to be lenient with it in terms of the point system, just because, beginnings are super hard. They're really hard, they're the hardest thing besides endings. Oh gosh, endings are the worst. The beginnings are hard, but the endings are the worst. They're the worst. They're the worst. I'm gonna be lenient with the point system. I might tip the scale, add a little bit more glow than grow, just because I know as a writer how difficult it is. But I'm going to stress. But this is the part where I'm going to pick you apart the most. Your beginnings and your endings, I'm going to pick it apart the most, just because they are so crucial. Like, it doesn't even matter how good the story itself is. If your beginning and your endings are not up to par, it'll just leave the reader with a bad taste in their mouth. It does. Sometimes it won't, because the rest of it was just that good, but it'll leave them with a bad taste in their mouth if the beginning and the ending are not as strong as the rest. So I'm going to pick that one apart, but I will be lenient with the scoring. My next question is, are all pieces of dialogue necessary, and do they fulfill their role to drive the plot? Again, just like how scenes and characters may not be necessary, so are pieces of dialogue. Every piece of dialogue has to have significance. Characters cannot just be talking nonchalantly. Even like in TV shows or in books where it seems like characters are just having small talk, you learn something interesting or new or important about the characters through that small talk. Therefore, the small talk isn't just small talk, it is crucial, important dialogue. You cannot just have your characters filibuster and talk about things that were just not important, okay? You can't do that. It's wasting time. It's wasting your time as a writer and wasting our time as a reader. Is the ending strong? That's my next question, but I kind of divided it up into two questions. Is the ending strong? Does it either wrap up the story or leave an interesting open ending successfully? Now, there are endings that are cliffhangers, and then there are endings that kind of wrap up the story in a nice tiny little neat little bow, you know what I'm saying? And both endings are perfectly fine. They're perfectly fine. But as long as it's successful and it's carried out in the best way possible. And like I said, with the beginnings, these are the parts I'm going to pick apart a lot as well. I'm going to take your last page, I'm going to take your last paragraph, and I'm going to take your last sentence, and I'm going to pick it apart. But I still will be lenient with the scoring, okay? And those are all my questions. That's how you get 100 points, either glow or grow points. And after that, I'm just gonna put up my favorite quotes that I've seen throughout the story and my final thoughts. And that will be the whole review process. Now, this is not exclusive to just reviews that I make on books or stories that have been published that weren't necessarily sent to me, but these will also be the rubric for subscriber submissions, which are just now coming out. Now you have the opportunity to submit your work. This will be the criteria for all the reviews that I make on narrative structure, like on stories. So I do want to discuss that I'm not going to be reviewing poetry, at least not at this time. I'll probably won't do it ever, but you know, maybe I will, maybe I'll feel like it. But I just feel like poetry is just so abstract that it would be really hard to create a rubric for poetry. Like, you know, stories themselves are abstract too. You know, there's not necessarily a lot of rule written in stone as to how to write a good story, but there are definitely ways to write a bad story. So that's why it's not as hard to create a rubric for narratives and things like that. But for now, poetry is just, it's not what I'm doing. I'm not doing it. I'll react to poetry all day, every day, but I will not review it. I'm sorry. Well, that's all information that I have for the glow and grow system, for the way I will be reviewing anything that's on my channel, including subscriber submissions. Thank you so much for chilling with me and taking in all this information. I know it's a lot. I know it's a lot. I will also be putting this video into the subscriber submission application, so in case you haven't watched it yet and you're interested in submitting your work, this will be in the application and I urge you to watch it. Please, if you're submitting your work, please watch it so you know what I plan on doing. Thank you so much for chilling with me today. Big up and bless up to you, and have an awesome day, you guys. Bye-bye.